Hi everyone, welcome to Chapter 2 of Blood Lily. If you missed the first installment, definitely check out Chapter 1. Here we go, Chapter 2. The large dining room held a sad collection of urban decay. Dirty linens clung desperately to abandoned tables. Dead flowers drooped from glass vases, with brown petals and leaves scattered chaotically. Chairs either littered the floor haphazardly or formed jumbled piles. Cracking holes filled the plate glass windows. Some were the size of rocks, while others suspiciously resembled bullet holes. The person that thought a fancy restaurant would go over in this neighborhood discovered how wrong they were in a hurry. Of course, none of them lasted long. At least 5 restaurants opened each week as 4 or 5 of them closed. It was the social cycle of New York City, which extended equally to nightclubs. Chance led her to the stairs in the back of the room and started jogging upward as Lilith trailed behind him. The wooden boards creaked dangerously as her pointed heels clicked against the surface. She peeked up to see him leaning against a wall at the top, with his arms crossed and a mischievous grin on his smug face. "The price you women pay for those things." He nodded at her shoes and laughed as she flipped him off and stepped onto the landing. Some might argue a woman who is already 5'9" doesn't need high heels, as if their sole purpose is to make a woman taller. She shouldered past him with a glare and opened the only door, closing it firmly behind her. "Lily!" The affectionate richness of Gregor's voice wrapped around her with glowing comfort. She was a daddy's girl, but she made no apologies for it either. There was nothing wrong with having a good relationship with her father. Of course, it was about as rare as a movie vampire in a polo and khakis. She turned to see her father leaning against an old desk and took a second to glance around, taking in the layers of dust everywhere except the office desk and the chair in front of it. A huge glass window covered in spider webs looked over the floor below. It allowed the diffused light from downstairs to give Gregor an uncharacteristically angelic silhouette. Typically, he was the moderately attractive man blending right into the background. She was always amazed by how unassuming he could appear. With his average face of lightly patterned smile lines and soft skin, it made his age ambiguous. Even the light sprinkles of gray in his dark hair and carefully trimmed beard weren't much to go on. He was forgettable, which was the whole point. Memorable people caught interest from all the wrong places, especially reporters. It was hard enough to stay out of the public eye, being a successful investor in New York City. The last thing he needed was some reporter prodding him on his anti-aging secrets. It was getting tougher and tougher to hide in the electronic, interconnected age of Homeland Security. "You two arguing again?" Sharp humor infiltrated his voice. He was very conscious of the friendly banter between them. Still, a speck of anxiety always accompanied the pleasant wit, and she never understood why. "Come on, you'd be worried if Chance and I weren't fighting." She dropped her case by the chair and walked up to hug her father. "We haven't gone out in a couple of weeks." She soaked in the solace before pulling back with a fixed stare. "So, what is up with the clandestine meeting? I thought I was going to be hacked to pieces before the door opened." The smile faltered on his face for a split second, and he shifted slightly, sitting farther back on the desk. "Have a seat, Lily. I'm glad you made it safe. I was a little worried about asking you to meet me here, but if I sent Chance, it would broadcast who you were meeting. It wouldn't be unreasonable for one to assume you were processing a crime scene here." A familiar hint of disapproval edged into his voice. He made no secret of disliking her choice of careers, but now wasn't the time to discuss his overprotective urges. "I may be processing one in the alley tonight." She meant it as a joke, but it came out as a flat statement. She slowly lowered herself into the chair with an anticipatory look and waited for him to continue. When he didn't say anything, she figured he needed a little help. "So, what is this delicate situation?" Gregor stared down at his hands, pausing like he couldn't figure out where to begin. I received word from Spencer today." The words caught her attention. Lilith hadn't heard from her cousin in over a decade. Her uncle, Duncan, and his family lived down south somewhere. Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, one of those states. With advancements in technology and massive vampires in one city would draw far too much attention. As a result, they were all pretty spread out. Gregor kept in regular touch, but nothing but about his body language suggested a conversation anywhere in the realm of normal. A subtle knot of worry began building at the bottom of her stomach. Is he okay? Oh yes, he's fine. He waved off her concern as he continued to try and find his words. Okay, then what is wrong? Gregor exhaled and reluctantly lifted his sky-gray eyes to meet hers. Duncan is missing. He hurried through the words like he was ripping off a Band-Aid. He's been spending more and more time at his winter home south of Knoxville. Spencer and Mariah were supposed to have dinner with him the night before last, but he wasn't home. They figured Duncan forgot, so they stayed in the guest rooms. He never showed up, and Duncan wouldn't stay out past dawn. He's too old to survive that. Gregor's voice was heavy with concern as he stared back down at his hands. The expression aged him instantly. Could he have gone back to the city? She knew as soon as the question left her mouth that it was an idiotically obvious one. Spencer wouldn't have called without checking something so simple. Gregor shook his head. He checked. With the current talks among the elders about going public, Duncan's disappearance creates a very delicate situation. The only people aware outside of the elders themselves are you, Mariah, Spencer, and Aaron's son, Michael. Something may have leaked out. If someone abducted Duncan, it could be retaliation. He was deep in thought, running through things in his head as if she didn't exist. Suddenly, he appeared drained. Surely people aren't opposed to that degree. I mean, I understand people don't like change, but with technology advancing and national securities tightening down, it's getting harder and harder on us. If it weren't for our private labs developing treatments and securing small blood banks for research, we'd be in a world of hurt. However, it only takes one determined reporter to bring it all out in black and white. Exposure is only a matter of time. He nodded with a faint trace of pride in his smile. Not all of us old stuffy bastards are comfortable leaving the shadows. They fear the knee-jerk reaction due to popular culture's portrayal of our kind. We must also consider the possibility of them dissecting and studying us. None of these are unreasonable concerns, but this, turning on our own kind? He let out another tired sigh. I want to say it's impossible, but... A tense silence reverberated in the air as he sat buried in his thoughts. She glanced down at the shiny aluminum kit next to her. So, a little off topic, but why did you ask me to bring my kit? An actual smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Oh, that. Well, yes, I thought carrying it would be appropriate in case someone followed you. Can't process a scene without a kit, right? A familiar glint lit his eyes for a second. He enjoyed the cloak and dagger intrigue, which was almost hypocritical. He didn't like her working crime scenes, but making some secret super spy meetings in a dangerous part of town was cool. She narrowed one eye and watched him. Something else was hiding behind the humorous twinkle in his eyes. Something he clearly wasn't saying. Why would anyone follow me? If Duncan's disappearance has anything to do with our plans, it's entirely conceivable. I only wanted to be cautious. He shifted his weight a bit. He was lying. He'd never lied to her before, but the signs were unmistakable. The slight pause in his voice, the quickness in his eyes, the small flex of the muscles around his mouth, the slightly elevated pulse. It felt like a slap in her face, but the steely undercurrent in his tone was enough to tell her not to push the issue, at least not now. She swallowed the lump in her throat and tried to focus on something else. What about other motives? Duncan did a lot of research in the Gaditha lab down south somewhere. I mean, he was instrumental in developing cloned blood to keep us farther under the radar. Did he have enemies? Perhaps he had another breakthrough, something someone wanted or wanted to stop. It is not beyond the realm of possibilities, though his work in the lab has been minimal as of late. He's been devoting more and more time to his research projects at home. He hasn't felt it necessary to share the details with Spencer or me. What about Mariah? Would she have any idea what he's been doing? He's always been closer to her than Spencer anyway. Not that I'm aware of. The uneasy constraint surrounding her father rubbed her the wrong way. He was holding things back from her, but why? If he wanted to find his brother, why not lay all the cards on the table? Being able to read faces was sometimes a curse, especially with close relationships. She lost a few boyfriends that way. White lies compound, and she started to notice every little one until she couldn't trust anything about them. She didn't want that kind of relationship with her father. Okay, listen. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and with a grimace of firm determination. You're not telling me everything. You better have a good reason. So let's move on to the part where you tell me how I can help. Lines of worry and nervousness flickered across Gregor's tired face. The honesty may have caught him by surprise, but he recovered quickly. I need you to fly down to Knoxville and examine this for me. You're exceptionally skilled in your field of investigation, and you're the only one that knows all the possible facts. Her eyebrows arched at that last bit, which was not missed by her father. I can see how that makes sense, even without knowing all of the pertinent facts. Gregor had the excellent taste to at least appear apologetic. I'll make a call to Alvarez, talk to him about covering things for a few days. He was about to protest when she barreled ahead. Don't worry, I won't tell him the reason. I'll say a conference popped up, pack a few things, and arrange a flight out tomorrow. Her mind started running through mental checklists. She always found it oddly relaxing. Lily! Mild amusement warmed his voice. Hold on. Make the call to Alvarez, but I do have this for you. He handed her an envelope and dug his phone out of his pocket, pressing a few buttons. After peeking inside, she glanced up at him with confusion. 2 tickets? Suddenly the door swung open and Chance leaned inside with his casual grace. You rang? Need me to escort Lily home? You sure did pick a seedy neighborhood. Not quite. I'm sending you with Lilith to Tennessee. Chance blinked in complete shock. Guess he wasn't lying when he said he didn't know why Gregor wanted to meet. But, sir... Her father held up a hand and fixed him with a firm stare that said his decision was final. I've already talked to Timothy. He'll take over your usual duties. We have a situation down south that I need Lilith to investigate, and I don't want to send her alone. I can trust you implicitly, and that's not something I can say about many people. I made promises to her mother before she died, and I won't neglect them, so I need you to protect her. You, of all people, will do whatever it takes to keep her safe. A weirdly significant stare passed between them before her father turned to face her. She can brief you as she sees fit. He held her gaze, which contained an unspoken novel of emotions. Chance dutifully nodded, and she couldn't refuse the escort because her father used his ultimate trump card. Her mother, Rosaline, passed away 11 years ago. Someone attacked her in Central Park, a robbery gone wrong. She'd lost a tremendous amount of blood, which she might have recovered from, but too much time passed before anyone found her. They tried blood transfusions and experimental medications, but in the end, she was too old to deal with the trauma. The lore of ancient, all-powerful vampires never made sense to her. How is it consistent that bullets cannot penetrate vampire skin, but a nudge from a stake was like a hot knife through butter, unless the vamp happened to be ancient? Years eventually weighed heavily on a vampire, and they couldn't cope with injuries as well as they could in their youth, much like humans. Age doesn't only affect the body, but the mind as well. Yes, they had decades or centuries of experience. Still, they had to adapt to changes in technology, social structure, and the world in general. The past 2 centuries alone held earth-shattering advances for someone who grew up with swords and chamber pots. It sounded like Duncan might be struggling with that very problem. He was drawing away from his usual activities, isolating himself, fixating on the past. They were all classic signs. However, it was pointless to draw conclusions yet. She shook off the mingled thoughts and slipped the envelope into her case. So I'm guessing we don't have time for dinner then. She succeeded in sounding light and humorous, which almost surprised her. Gregor slid off the desk and held out a hand with his warm, casual smile. I'm sorry, Lily. She took his hand and stood up as he pulled her into a hug. Be careful. Be sure to call me. I'll worry. I don't like sending you, but I have no one else. If anything happens to you... He released her and stepped back, turning toward Chance as his smile faded and that cold, commanding facade took its place. As tranquil and mild-mannered as her father seemed, he was quite capable of intimidation. "I'm trusting you with a lot, Chance. Do not disappoint me." His voice was severe, but something unspoken lurked behind his words. It hung in the air, filling the small room with a tension she didn't understand. And then, like that, it was gone. Chance cracked his easygoing smile and shook Gregor's hand in agreement. "Yeah, I'll be careful too." His sarcastic tone would have been a dangerous move with any other employer. Her father merely raised an eyebrow and shook his head. "Flight leaves in a couple of hours. You two should pack. I'll have a car pick you both up at Lilith's apartment. I included some cash in the envelope for expenses, hotel rooms, and whatnot." Gregor started toward the door and then turned quickly with a snap. "I almost forgot. I put in a request. The car will have a cooler of supplies. With your medical license, Lilith, and the paperwork in that envelope, you shouldn't have any trouble transporting the samples. I don't trust the supply in Knoxville to be uncompromised or accessible. Call me when you arrive and settle in." He leaned in the door and pressed a kiss against Lilith's cheek. Once he was gone, Chance and Lilith exchanged helpless smiles that felt incredibly awkward. "Well, travel buddy, should I meet you at your place in a bit?" His smile was friendly, but held a definite undercurrent of fear that she could not comprehend. His job was far from cushy. Gregor was too old to go out during the day, so he conducted all his business at night, in New York City. She knew of at least a dozen times he'd protected him from muggers over the past few years. Maybe he was scared of flying. "Why don't we share a taxi? Stop at your place and then head to mine, safety in numbers and whatnot." He forced a laugh and fell into another strained, silent pause. "Well, since I am your newly appointed bodyguard, I suppose that would only be fair. I'd be in a world of shit if something happened to you before we even left town." "Yeah, well, here's hoping I survive your apartment." She paused and tapped a finger against her lips. "Maybe I should wait in the car. Might be safer. You could have one of those stalker chicks scoping at your place, waiting to pounce on anyone that gets between the two of you." Chance appeared offended as she walked past him down the stairs. "Ha, funny." His sarcasm was a little flat and dull. After a brief pause, she heard him jogging to catch up with her. Lilith stared out the window at the aging warehouse in complete shock. She figured Chance didn't live in an uptown apartment complex, but this... Broken, dusty windows, brick crumbling at the worn corners, and layer after layer of spray paint from local gangs covering the walls. "Holy crap! I was kidding when I said the car might be safer. Please tell me you do not live here." He frowned at her and reached for the door handle. "Suck it up, Cher. I'm not leaving you in the car." Hesitantly, she followed him to the darkened entrance. There was no light inside, only inky blackness that didn't feel any better than the alley outside the restaurant. "You do get paid, don't you? I mean, seriously, Chance. I've seen homeless shelters that are more inviting. You aren't squatting, are you?" "I like my space. Besides, the safest place in the city. Who the hell would rob a place like this? And I'm not squatting. I own it." There was a strange mixture of pride and embarrassment in his voice as he talked about the place. His muscled shoulders slumped down as he disappeared into the dark. She stared after him, biting nervously at her lip. She didn't know if it was better to follow him or wait. A second later, the entire building lit up, golden light pouring from every window. Somehow, that simple thing changed the atmosphere of the whole structure. Funny how that happened. It was still creepy, but at least it didn't feel as deadly. Chance appeared in the doorway, looking impatient. "Are you going to stand out there all night? Because, seeing as I'm responsible for you, it'll be incredibly hard to pack and watch you out here at the same time." She rolled her eyes, walking into the open doorway with caution. The bottom floor matched the outside. Dirty, dusty, littered with abandoned junk, empty bottles, and rusty hardware. Her heels clicked against the concrete, which echoed eerily through the cavernous space. Chance rummaged in his pockets and pulled out a small key ring. He was standing in front of a freight elevator, complete with an old wooden gate. He crouched, fiddling with the lock, before holding up the gate and making a gallant gesture for her to enter. "After you, m'lady." A cheeky smile pulled at his lips, but there was an edge of something in his face. Nervousness, maybe? Odd. Am I going to need a tetanus shot after this? She glared at him, hesitating as she inspected the rusting monstrosity. He flashed a sharp scowl, and she begrudgingly pushed past him. Keep it up, and I'll leave you locked in here. He turned around to consider her for a moment with pure amusement. You know, that's not a bad idea. Stuff it. She crossed her arms in a huff. The ancient machine lurched into motion, making her hands fly out to grip the rail tight with a small yelp. There was no missing the smug grin he attempted to hide. The elevator droned and rumbled as it crept upwards. After a few torturous moments, the metal beast lurched to a stop, and he bent down to pull the gate up, holding it open for her again. She started to shoulder past him with an irritated glare and stopped utterly still as her eyes took in the view. Gorgeous, hand-scraped hardwood floors in a slight gray wash stretched the vast open space. The artfully designed lighting was a living entity of the room, drawing your attention to the black and white photographs along the steel blue walls. The pictures included haunting shots of lone trees in the fog, austere buildings with magnificent architecture, the back of a woman standing in a field, the wind blowing her hair. They all had a common theme: isolation. She gaped back at Chance, who squirmed a bit under her gaze. He moved anxiously around her and dropped his keys in a little bowl on a marble-topped table. Well, make yourself at home. I better grab my stuff. He hurried to a flight of curving stairs that led up to a loft. After setting down her case, she slipped off the high heels. Her bare feet were warm on the wood floors as she stalked past a clean and efficient kitchen in blue hues and stainless steel. So, this is your woman's snaring pad. Her voice echoed loudly, and after a couple of minutes, he peeked over the railing. You are kidding, right? He quirked an eyebrow and stared down at her. The weight in his eyes felt somehow noteworthy. It was a fight to get you in here, and you've known me for 13 years. If I brought a stranger to this building, they'd think I was some serial killer. After flashing a sarcastic smile, he disappeared again to the sound of her amused laughter. She ran her fingers over a sage-green blanket laid over the back of a low-gray couch. She curled up in its comfort and glanced over the books scattered across the marble coffee table. There were a few cookbooks and a couple about prominent photographers. Then there were the ones that didn't surprise her. A few magazines on home improvement and an owner's manual for a Honda motorcycle. As she flipped through one of the photography books, Chance jogged down the stairs with the medium black suitcase. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and stared at her. You never told me you liked photography. Lilith slid the book back onto the table with a casual smile. Yeah, well, you never asked. He grumbled as he transversed the room and grabbed his keys from the table by the elevator. She watched him from the couch until he turned around, a 6'3" mass of seething tension. Are you finished? We should get to your place. She was surprised by the strong hints of defensive anger. Her mouth opened to say something, but she couldn't think of anything and settled for a nod. The monstrous contraption was just as terrifying on the way down, and the silent hostility made it even worse. She still had no idea what to say when the cab pulled up. She didn't have the faintest clue why he was upset. Finally, Chance let out a soft sigh and stared at her over the taxi. Lily, look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap at you. I'm not used to having people in my place. She forced a smile and shrugged. A territorial thing. I get it. Just like her bedroom sanctuary. She slipped into the cab before he could say anything else. The ride to her apartment was quiet but comfortable. They were in and out of her place in a matter of minutes. She managed to keep him out of the bedroom while she packed. He settled for browsing her book collection and hollering out questions about them every few minutes. Somehow, she thought, that was more about keeping contact than wanting to know about the specifics of ballistics or entomology. Charlie waved to her over the blue curly hair of one of the elderly tenants. She didn't know her neighbors. Her busiest times were at night, and most of her apartment building consisted of people that turned in after Jeopardy. Occasionally, she'd get invitations to building parties or birthdays. However, the truth was she didn't want to get to know her neighbors. She only wanted peace and solitude when she was home. She walked up to the desk, apologized to the older woman, and turned to Charlie. I'm heading out of town for a few days. Could you be my hero and hold my mail until I get back? Of course, dear. I'll let Gary know first thing in the morning. His smile made his entire face crinkle into deep lines. His eyes traveled to something behind her, and there was a sudden happy light in his eyes. Wonderful time, miss. Her eyes followed Charlie's line of sight to Chance, leaning against the door. She couldn't help but laugh. Oh no, not that sort of trip. Business only. Charlie winked at her. The sleek black town car was waiting out front for them, idling at the curb. Chance grabbed her bags and headed to the trunk as the driver jogged around to open the door for her. We should be at the airport in about 45 to 50 minutes, miss. She nodded and climbed into the smooth black leather seat. It was a far cry from the conventional cabs that smelled like day-old Indian food and cheap air fresheners. The anonymous driver closed the door, and seconds later Chance joined her in the back. The town car pulled away from the curb and into the surprisingly light traffic of the early morning. In a few hours it would be rush hour gridlock from hell. Driving in New York had only one rule. If it was bigger than you, get the hell over. Stoplights, road signs, cops, none of it mattered. Only the golden rule kept you alive. That was the main reason she didn't bother buying a car. Not only was it pointless, but she'd wind up killing the first asshole that dented it. By her observations, that would happen in no more than 24 hours, so she left the driving to the veteran taxis. So, Chance turned to her, and all the tension and defensive posturing from earlier was gone. He sat there with his familiar nonchalant attitude. Since we have some private time, would you like to brief me? A sly smile curled his lips, which made her grin and roll her eyes. Phrasing, you pervert, she muttered with a smile. Lilith took a moment to collect her thoughts, remembering her father's heavy look. Gregor's brother Duncan is missing. Spencer and Mariah are freaking out, so we're going down to check into things. He appeared suspicious and doubtful. You need a bodyguard to chase down an old vamp that probably shacked up somewhere for the night? I'm Gregor's head of security, not some brain-dead meathead. He seemed vaguely insulted as he slumped into his seat. She sighed softly, trying to figure out what to say without bringing up the whole super-secret talks about going public. Without that angle, sending a seasoned bodyguard didn't make a lot of sense. He's family, Chance. Gregor doesn't have much of that left. There's no sign of him at his place in Knoxville or his winter home. I think he's assigning you to me as a precaution. He's kind of nervous about things these days. Sorry, I guess that came out wrong. I didn't mean to imply. I know. She interrupted him as his cheeks blushed pink with embarrassment. It was almost cute on him. I'm just as concerned about him wanting you to go. I think there may be more to the story that he's not sharing. He didn't seem overwhelmingly surprised by that statement, but she didn't notice, too lost in her own thoughts. Why you? I mean, why not send Timothy? She wasn't asking him, more like talking out loud. However, she soon realized that Chance was frowning at the rude line of questioning, and Lilith scrambled to recover. Not that I don't enjoy your company. Chance leaped at the opportunity to leave the in-depth talk behind and return to casual banter. Familiar territory. Aw. Are you going to crochet my name on a pillow, or maybe buy us matching shirts? His eyes glinted with confident humor, but somehow it seemed like a hollow facade this time. Is that a new fetish? Wait. Nope. I don't want to know. Chance's laugh wrapped around her like a warm blanket, which of course pulled a smile out of her. You are such an ass. She chuckled the words as Chance bumped his shoulder against hers. Oh, come on, Lily. You wouldn't have me any other way. He winked, and she settled for flipping him off. They arrived at the airport an hour later, and thanks to their tickets, rushed through most of the security until it came to the biohazard cooler. The officer was a squat, Middle Eastern man in his late 50s that nervous flyers kept eyeballing. He scrutinized her license and paperwork for what seemed like an eternity. After opening the container and looking over the half-dozen bags of medical-labeled blood and a package of red gel caps, his bulbous nose scrunched in distaste. What's it for? He grunted with a heavy accent. It's there in the paperwork. We're transferring research materials to a lab in Knoxville. Lilith pointed impatiently at the document in his hand. He turned his pot-marked face up at her, and the frown of disgust didn't leave. The pills? He barked it with the kind of disdain reserved for people that peered down their nose at him. An experimental treatment for thalassemia. I can't go into any more detail. Companies and their bureaucratic secrecy. Always a pain in my ass. She huffed and crossed her arms, hoping she'd spark a mutual hatred for upper management that would get her through this faster. The bait paid off. The thick man's face brightened, and he closed the container, handing her back the paperwork. The damn need for secrecy is what makes my job harder. Not your fault. Everything looks okay. Lilith flashed him an enigmatic smile that brought a ragged, toothy grin out of the man. Chance feigned a cough and nudged her forward as she grabbed her stuff. Thank you, officer. Enjoy the rest of your day. She beamed an apologetic smile as Chance herded her forward. They ran to their gate and finally boarded the plane. Chance leaned over her shoulder and whispered, I left Spencer a voicemail with the flight info while you were busy with the undercover terrorist. Speaking of which, I never knew you were such a charmer, Lily. Probably made that guard's year, you know. He bumped her shoulder again with a chuckle, and she playfully nudged her elbow at his stomach. Don't stereotype. He's an honest man earning honest pay. This is like traveling with a 16-year-old. Why does Gregor keep you around again? Because of my infinite charm, my rugged good looks, and my crazy skills. Chance wiggled his eyebrows, and she shook her head. I am not going to ask why Gregor would keep you around because of your good looks. That says volumes about you and my father that I never, ever want to know. Wow, I didn't see that backfire coming. I must be losing my touch. Assuming you had it to begin with, of course. The sugar-sweet smile she flashed over her shoulder earned a playful scowl that made it all worth it. And that concludes Chapter 2.